Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. Tim and Harry, I'm really pleased to have you on the show. Welcome to The No Show. First of all, I'd like to start off by asking you individually, how have you been dealing and sort of responding to this unusual time for academics?
Well, where do I start? Well, first of all, thanks for having us, Hussain. It's been a very challenging time for all sorts of reasons, trying to balance work and life, research, teaching, preparing for the coming uncertain academic year. It's been stressful. And of course, the research has been challenging as well because of all the problems around the world where we're working with our country researchers. So things have been slow. In some places, things have stalled. But in other places, things are starting to move. So we found new methods of reaching, the people that we need to reach. So it's been challenging, but I think we have been making some progress. What do you say, Tim?
I have a very different perspective. I must be one of the few people in the world who's loved it. I've been sort of shielding at home. I've been to a shop once since March the 11th, and I'm lucky enough. You can see the study here. So I've been able to work without having to travel. It's fantastic, Not these horrible big long airline journeys to exciting places. But you save 2 hours a day just traveling, not going to the office or whatever. So I'm very lucky. I've got a little garden, so I grow my own vegetables and stuff. But I love writing, and I've been doing writing and doing research. And as I said, it's fantastic, and taking lots of. I've got an exercise bike, so I keep alive.
Oh, excellent! So you don't need to go out for your constitutional one run a day.
Once a week, I go for a walk, but so at obscure times when other people aren't out.
Excellent. So can I ask you both? Given that you both have sort of had completely different sort of experiences in this period, how much has it been sort of a process of food for thought in terms of your own research?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure our experiences are that different, I'd say. I think Tim has a very positive spin on it, I think. So, for instance, very directly, this COVID-19 and the lockdowns have impacted our research, very directly. For instance, a couple of weeks after we went into lockdown, I was meant to travel, for field research. So, and then much later, Tim and I were both meant to travel. So all of that, we had several trips planned, arrangements put in place in Malaysia, in South Africa, potentially in Ghana. So all those projects, all of those activities were postponed, and we don't know when we might be able to, sort of pick up on those. Although we have country researchers in each of those places who are actually beginning to do some work. Different countries are coming out of lockdown at different periods. So it has impacted us. And of course, what the project is carrying on. And as you probably know, our project is very big. It's got many partners around the world. So we've been having regular meetings. We've been, reading and trying to write about what's going on, looking at the literature. We've had discussions about COVID-19 and its implications. And we're also putting in backup plans, thinking about alternative strategies in dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, again, maybe I'm being more positive. I think good research always has alternative ways of tackling a problem. So to get really specific, we were meant to be out in the field interviewing migrants about their use of digital tech. We'll get on to talking about the progress of, but we thought, okay, that's no longer going to be possible. We can't travel, the restrictions in country. So let's be innovative and creative and explore the ways that we can actually use digital technology to try and understand that. So we developed some online surveys in multiple languages. So I've even learnt some French Creole from translations that we did to get our online survey that we created. Now, in Haiti, we would never have done that approach to research if it hadn't been for COVID-19. So, the restriction is actually enabling us to do new and exciting things, and it's changed the direction of some of our research as well. So, we don't see it as a constraint. We see it as an opportunity to be creative, and that's what academics are good at.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
No, I mean it's really interesting to hear that. Given that the scale of certain types of projects that are being carried out by academics. And so I want you, if I could start with you, Harry, could you introduce the project that you guys have been working on to the audience, just to give a bit of context?
Sure. So first, perhaps I could start with the broader context of the project, what the project is, and then about our role within it. So we're part of this UK Research and Innovation funded Global Challenges Research Fund project. It's called South-South Migration, Inequality and Development Hub. So the British government has funded a number of hubs to look at intractable global challenges, development challenges. And so this particular hub, our hub, is on migration between countries of the South, developing, emerging. And the project examines really the intersection of migration and inequality in the global South. So we're looking at the movement of people between particular corridors. So we're looking at, it's a metaphor for movement, flow of goods, ideas, knowledge, all of those different things. Rather than focusing on specific countries, the project looks at flows. So for instance, between Ghana and China, between South Africa and Ethiopia, Nepal and Malaysia, Haiti, Brazil, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and I forget one, Egypt and Jordan. Yeah, so I think these are the corridors we are examining. So we're looking at how migrants are being affected in these contexts, through various social, political, economic, phenomena that's happening in those contexts, and whether migration actually facilitates development for these people, or what the constraints are. So, whether migration increases inequality, migration helps to reduce inequality, perhaps there's a bit of both. There is research evidence that suggests both. So this is the context of the project. Within that, what Tim and I are leading on is a work package on digital technologies and how that intersects with inequality within this migration context. We're looking at whether digital technologies can address inequalities, whether they exacerbate inequalities in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
We keep an open mind. Our project really is about working with migrants in these contexts.
So can I ask, why are you looking at sort of the digital aspect of it? What is it? What was the backdrop to that?
Maybe I could answer that. For sort of 20 years, or longer, we've been working on the intersection between digital technologies and international development. And so this is a multi-MIDEC, as the project's called, is a multidisciplinary project. And we were approached because the leader, it's based out of Coventry, the leader's a professor there, and she felt that the digital technology is all pervasive and it would be useful to have that dimension in there. And so how do migrants use digital tech at the moment, and how might it be used to make change in the future? So there are sort of a whole load of work packages. Our work packages is very much looking at implementation. So out of the research that we do, we're going to be working in country with migrants and tech developers to identify a challenge and something that we can actually have as a productive output. I think we should just sort of building on what Harry was saying. A fundamental element of our work is working with migrants, not on migrants or for migrants. Mm-hmm. Migrants know vastly more about migration than any academic ever will. And so what we do is we have an understanding of technology, both its strengths and very much its weaknesses, both positive and the negative. And so understanding firstly how migrants use technologies, then what they might like to use them for to reduce inequality and improve their lives. And then the third stage is actually trying to work with them and with tech developers that we know in each of the countries where we're working to come up with some tech that will change things. You know, one of the interesting bits we've discovered already is that there are thousands of apps developed for migrants. Most migrants never use them. I mean, I was looking at the figures today from our online surveys, and it's about only 5% of the migrants who've responded have ever used an app designed for a migrant.
That's very interesting that your approach is sort of almost as if it's a partnership with them.
Yes. You can't do good research otherwise. You know, research isn't about working on poor people to get your paper published that nobody reads, but your career will develop.
That's fascinating to me. But my question to you is, given the sort of lack of usership of these apps that have been developed, how receptive are migrants to the work that you guys are doing with them?
Harry, I'm happy to go with that. Very. I mean, it's amazing. And again, you know, where we're working with partners in all of the countries where we're working. So particularly in all of them, we're working with experts who have a long tradition of working with the migrants in those countries, and you know, generally trying to help them in positive ways. So they have built those relationships already. I'll give you a actually focused example. In South Africa, because we couldn't travel there, we worked through some of the networks that we got, and I met online some amazing people who are working with migrants, and then they shared our research instrument, this online survey, with the migrants with whom they were working. And although actually a really good example of how COVID has changed things, because we were focusing initially on the corridors, but we then realized that, so instead of asking the Ethiopian migrants in South Africa, only those to contribute to the survey, the online survey enabled us to ask anybody. So it just turns out in South Africa, we've got, I think it's about a third of the responses are actually from Zimbabwean women working in South Africa.
Wow.
So doing this online survey means that our research is much, much broader. And although our main focus is on Ethiopia to South Africa, we can draw comparisons between what they're experiencing and then the other migrants. So it makes it much more nuanced and sophisticated. You know, we do clearly hope to go back and interview in the field as well. But it just shows how if you're, you know, take the opportunity and you're creative, you can discover all sorts of fascinating things.
Just going back to why digital technologies are saying, you know, you look at any discussion on migration now, technology features centrally, you know, not necessarily just from the control point of view, you know, the securitization of borders and surveillance, all of that aspect, you know, that is a big, big part of the migration debate at the moment. But actually, from the migrants' point of view, there's a lot of work that shows how technologies might facilitate migration processes at different in the entire journey. So, for instance, in terms of getting the information to think about, you know, where you might migrate or if you might migrate, to give you that information that enables you to make that decision. That migration decision making is a key aspect. In fact, there's a whole work package in the project dedicated to that aspect. But then through the orientation, the journey, the planning, and the arrival, and also the integration, but also sometimes return. Very often migration is cyclical. So people go back and forth. They're never in one place. The whole thing about is mobility, you know. But freedom to move, whether someone can move or whether they can't move, it is determined by so many factors. There are so many constraints on these things. So one of the first things that both Tim and I would say is the fact that the migrants aren't the most marginalized people, because there are people who can't move. Mm-hmm. Those are the even most marginalized, you know, because they don't have the resources to move. So there are any number of inequalities in this context. And digital technology, we could say, might enable, facilitate, empower in different ways, at different levels, But at the same time, it can also be used as an instrument of control. It can be used to keep tabs on your family members. There are all sorts of positive and negative uses, if you want to use that kind of language. So it's a very complex scenario. And whether migrants are receptive to this kind of research, I think, from our online survey, as Tim was saying, that we are getting fantastic responses in some countries where things are better in relation to COVID. For instance, Nepal, we've got hundreds of responses. So migrants are receptive, but of course, this kind of research can only happen if you build a coalition. So you need to work in partnership with people on the ground. It was very much our intention to be on the ground in the early phase of the research, and of course later as well. But we really wanted to work with our local country researchers, but COVID-19 prevented that. But we have fantastic networks locally in all of those countries, and these are very often experts in migration and who work with stakeholders in those countries. So that gives us an opportunity to engage with NGOs, migrant communities, migrant groups, to be able to get them on board. Because otherwise, this research is meaningless. I mean, we want to work with them and understand, what their notions of inequality are. What are the problems that they face? What can we do to work with them to address those issues? A number of these apps, for instance, Europe, we've seen proliferation of apps, migrant apps. And I actually went through quite a few of them, actually ended up downloading quite a few. There was an initial spike in use and then drops off very often because they're not updated. So they're insecure, creating more vulnerability for migrants who are already vulnerable, as you can imagine. But also, migrants, people find better ways to communicate, and these so-called dedicated apps and technologies designed for them without really understanding how they use it and for what purposes. So very often they revert back to WhatsApp and Facebook, which they understand really well. So of course, we really don't want to reinvent the wheel and develop yet another app that no one uses, but we really want to understand what it is that we could do in that context that might be beneficial. It may not be an app at all.
I mean, the question that comes to my mind when it comes to apps and sort of migration is, generally apps have a goal. The goal of apps, fundamentally, given the history and sort of progression of Silicon Valley, has been to make money. Now, in the context of migration, what goals are there to be had when you're looking at the sort of types of apps that are created for migrants? Are there any specific humanitarian goals? Is it fundamentally about their data and how it can be used to sort of meet some capitalistic gains?
Let me take that, Harry. I'm absolutely with you that basically the digital system is about making money for the what some people call the digital barons in the US, but also for young app developers. Everyone's out there to make some money because it's seen as something to do. However, alongside that, there are humanitarian organizations, UN agencies, and civil society organizations that are trying to do good. And to help migrants through the use of digital technologies. And then there are academics who want to make money so their careers by studying it as well. But it's a mixture of people who are there. And I do think there are many of goodwill, but who may not sufficiently understand the technology and so knowing the harms that it will do. So one of our biggest concerns is around privacy. And given how much data many apps take from people, we are very, very cautious in app use by migrants because many migrants are on the edge of things that are legal or not, or many migrants are oppressed, particularly under COVID. The way in which in some countries migrants have been rounded up and put in camps. Now, is the use of digital tech really going to be to their advantage? So it comes back to our original statement and that Harry built on, that we're not working on migrants. And that's why we want to work with them to say, okay, what are the challenges you face? How would you like the world to be more equal from your perspective? and then think, using our expertise and our links with the tech sector, actually, wow, how could we do that? And we talk a lot about the different privacy models that are out there. Many would say that having a digital ID is fantastic for migrants, but is it really? And what about, for example, you could have a data chip in your arm that's got all your qualifications on, so that when you go to your destination, you could just have that scanned and they'd know that yes, gosh, this person really is the person. But you could, of course, have actually got somebody else's data chip and put that in instead and pretend to be. So, we're really, really interested in these ethical dimensions. Absolutely right that the digital tech sector is about making money, therefore making the world more unequal. But there are those who are wanting to try and use it to reduce the inequalities, and we're very much in the latter part. But that means working with the poorest and the most marginalised.
Harry, can I come back to you? So within all the sort of work packages that you have in this project, have there been some initial findings that have sort of been concrete?
It's very early days. It's very early days. So, I couldn't talk about the other work packages, of course, I guess you'll need to speak to some of them. For instance, in terms of the themes that people are studying at the moment, there's already been some reports out on the impact of, for instance, COVID on remittances, for instance, or on migrants in specific contexts, like Haitian migrants. Vast majority of the country is dependent on migration and remittances. Similarly, in Nepal, remittances have been significantly affected, and also particular government policy in countries like Malaysia have affected migrants. So there's some study already published on our website on those aspects. But in terms of the project itself, there are a number of issues. So it looks at what we term axes of inequality. So we look at gender, childhood, income inequalities. And there are migration processes and outcomes like decision-making, intermediaries, and resource flows. And then finally, development interventions, which is where we come in. So it's not just technology, digital technology related interventions, but also political mobilization, as well as access to justice. So three work packages in that area. So all of these, the intervention work packages such as ours come a little bit later, but all of the other thematic work packages are beginning to start the research. We're meant to have a global hub survey, which has been curtailed because of COVID at the moment. So things have been a little bit slow in terms of concrete findings. But I know we can talk a little bit about our work package and some of our early findings. I think Tim has just done some analysis on our current state of affairs on our online survey.
Yes, please, yeah.
You're on mute, Tim.
I can be really boring about this. I can even share my screen and show you some of the data. But yeah, we're getting some really fascinating results. And so, just to pick up on what Harry was talking about earlier, in when do people use digital tech? And that is showing us really significant differences between migrants from different countries and in different places. So just a quick one-off, some data here that in migrants in Ghana, more than 2/3 use digital tech as part of, very frequently in deciding to migrate. But in Nepal, that was just 40%. And you could contrast that then with in South Africa, it was also about 40%. And so we can begin to see in quite fine detail the ways in which people from different parts of the world, different cultures, different economic backgrounds use tech. And the key thing is it's not the same, it's very diverse. So that actually implication for us is the need to design locally, contextually specific solutions for with the migrants who are going to be using them. I think a second broad area that's really quite significant, although it's too early to make sweeping generalizations. But there's a lot of people who are working this are focusing on employment and how will digital tech enable migrants to get a better, fairer share of work, and that actually having mobile devices can help improve your chance of getting a job. There are examples that are often cited in different parts of the world as sort of maids who work in people's houses. They use their mobile phone to get business, or ironing is another example. So small, tiny, so one person ironing businesses, they get their customers and use mobile devices. Now, research we've done over a long time now has shown that, yes, some people do use digital tech for economic employment purposes, but that is pretty much a minority, and most people actually use them for entertainment, for social networking, and the like. That view seems to be very much reinforced in our migrant data. Very few of our migrants actually say they use digital tech for work purposes, other than when they're at work and their work involves digital tech. They use them like you and I do, for chatting with people, for getting entertainment, for gaming, and for other reasons that we.
But can I interrupt him for a second? I mean, could that also be? I mean, this is early. I mean, we really haven't got into detailed analysis yet. So it could also depend on the stage at which a migrant is, for instance, in their destination. So, for instance, it could well be that many of our migrants are well settled in those countries and therefore are using technology in the way that you and I might use. However, if for instance, if it is during the migration journey or immediately after arrival, it may be a different set of usage patterns, one would imagine. So that's something we still need to explore. For instance, survival stage, trying to integrate, get access to services, register yourself, find, get help with language, all of those things might be much more important, in terms of the early stages of arrival. So there is a temporal aspect to this as well, orientation, access to services and all of that, but integration and much more relaxed, ways of using technology, maybe that's something that we see later on. But also, in terms of adding to Tim, one of the things that we'll be looking for is also how migrants are presenting their identity using digital technology, how they bond with their people back home, but also how they present themselves in the local context that they live in. So in terms of integrating with the local community, that may be an issue. So in the migration literature, there's this debate about whether migrants are they integrate, or because of digital technologies, they're actually more connected with where they come from. You know what I mean? So because of digital technology, you have a tendency to be in your own little bubbles, in your own groups, in your own cultural, sort of milieu, rather than interact more broadly. So that, there is obviously research that suggests that, but of course, migration and tech research has moved on. There's a lot more evidence that migrants can be both here and there. In a sense, they're embedded in both contexts. So that, of course, it isn't the same for everyone, right? Because you're talking about there are many structural reasons why different migrants will use different types of technology in different ways. Some enabling, some not so enabling, some definitely constraining. So there are inequalities even there, but I lost my train of thought there.
No, I mean, you've kind of done a pretty good job in sort of prompting my sort of line of thinking on this, because to me, in my mind, there's a lot of facets to it, to this sort of migration in the digital context, and one that comes to mind is, the first one that comes to mind rather is, can you tell from the data, or sort of from the communication that you've had with migrants in general, at what stage in sort of this migration cycle they're in, and also can you tell what the main reasons for their migration are? Is it like, of course, economic would be a very big one, but is it exclusively economic, or is it sometimes a matter of safety?
I mean, our data, one of the other parts of my deck are asking those questions. Our data is very much trying to find out how migrants who are in different stages of migration, and we do have that, how they're using the digital technology. In any survey, imagine trying to complete a 15-minute survey on that. You don't want to have too many questions. So we've had to restrict it to a key number of questions so that they don't get too bored with answering it. So, but we disaggregate it. For example, we questioned around when they decide to migrate, how do they use it before departure, during the migration journey, destination, while you're in the new location, deciding to go home, and when you've returned home. So we examine all these questions at those different stages, and then we can cross-correlate all of their different answers and look at the different kinds of jobs. One of the great things about doing an online survey like this is that you can have a multidimensional analysis of it. Of course, it only picks up or mainly picks up those who have digital technologies, and there are those who don't. But we've even asked those who don't to get a friend to help them with it. So it's interesting looking at those who don't use digital technologies very much, why they think about and what they think about. So
and in sort of on that sort of note, given that you're looking at the different stages, are you looking at sort of how their digital sort of usage varies according to each stage? Because I imagine that at one stage somebody is using digital media for one thing, but once they get to the other side, they're going to be using it predominantly for communication to speak back home.
Yes and no. I think we have clear evidence that they use different types of digital technology at different stages, more or less, and that varies in the countries where we're working. I think there are lots of reasons why people use digital tech. So, for example, I was working 10, 15 years ago, when mobile phones were first coming out. And people, I won't say the part of the world this was, but it wasn't in Europe. And it was where there were lots of lorry drivers and other people who are migrating through the country. And people sort of said, gosh, that's wonderful. It enables husbands and wives to communicate with each other. When the husband was away working, and they could, chat with the family and reassure them all. And so that was seen as very positive. But then actually there was a lot of evidence as to the research we were involved in that showed, well, that quite often the men were telling lies to their wives and families. And the reason they were contacting them was to pretend to reassure them when they were having an affair or with a second or third wife. So I think the getting at those nuances is very, very difficult through an online survey, which is why I think Harry and our preference is mainly to build trust and do qualitative kinds of research. But the way in which you have a sort of multidimensional data set that you can cross questions, you can actually then, for those who like quantitative research, we can say, yes, there is a significant difference, for example, between migrants from Nepal and migrants from Ghana and migrants from Haiti on particular issues. So we could get at some of it, but it's really, really important to use different kinds of research to try and unravel some of these tricky questions.
Can I ask you about sort of your individual journeys and what your interest, what sparked your interest in sort of this concept of, or this line of research in migration? And can I start with you, Harry? So what sort of what got you into this line of research?
Well, I've always been interested in technology and development, so that's been one of my areas of interest. So essentially, my background is political economy, social science background, but stumbled into information systems in a sense, and I've always been interested in the socio-technical, sort of view of technology and what it means for organizations and people. And so I started with some policy research in the early days, but then looked at small and medium enterprises, but also large organizations how to use technologies and what this means for for people in those organizations. So always with the socio-technical lens, being in a school of management, that is the kind of perspective that we bring to bear with it. In an ICT for D, of course, the challenge is whether technology actually enables development or constrains it. How we conceptualize technology in those contexts really matter. How we conceptualize what we mean by development also matters. So this has been a theme that's been of great interest for many, many years. And of course, as part of the UNESCO chair in ICT for D at Royal Holloway, it's enabled me to develop broader networks, and that's how we ended up with this project. Tim and I ended up with this, being connected to the lead from Coventry University on this particular project, and it's a new context for us, migration, but essentially the phenomena we're looking at is still technology development, how it addresses inequality, but in a new context. So that is really fascinating. It's an opportunity to learn. And this MIDEC project brings so many amazing partners from 12 different countries and almost 40 partners, including organizations like the International Organization for Migration. So it's a fantastic learning opportunity for us. And we've been having some great conversations as well, despite COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So that, in short, that's the kind of journey that brought me to this particular project.
Well, I might also point out that you're a migrant as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Go ahead, Tim. What about yourself?
Yeah, well, I have a little more grey hair than Harry does. So, I in the early 70s was working with friends in India, in rural India, on international development issues. I'd been programming in Fortran as well. So way back in the 70s, I had this interconnection between the idea of technology and international development. And my work in India taught me a lesson that I've held forever, and that is very different from much contemporary views about development, which actually for me, development's about reducing inequalities rather than maximizing economic growth. Mm-hmm. And so I've always had that perspective. Anyway, cut a long story short, I had a fairly traditional academic career until around about 2000. I was then asked to lead one of our Prime Minister's special initiatives about technology, education, Africa partnerships. So we created a partnership network working in 8 African countries. And then I did that on secondment from the university. And then when I came back, thought, wow, let's just see if this idea of ICTs, digital technologies for development, might grow. And so we created a collective, people committed to doing the best possible quality of research with and for the poorest and the most marginalized, hence why we call it ICT for development. Mm-hmm. And development has understands inequality, and things grew from there. We then got a UNESCO chair, and we've been working in this space for a long time. And my own personal interest is very much around inequality, equity, the dark side. Most people talk about the good side. Yeah, we recognize that. I often feel I'm the guilty conscience because the harms that digital tech can do tend to get swept under the carpet, and they increase inequality. I mean, look at the profits being made by big US corporations. We saw Apple yesterday or the day before having trillions, the biggest size of the company of any company that's ever been, actually that contributes to inequality. If you have a digital device, you can leap ahead, but the people who are left with nothing are basically left further behind, and that's what interests me. And migrants fit into that, because many migrants are as we said at the beginning, there is this tension, but many migrants are exploited by the employers or others in the countries to which they migrate. But at the same time, they may be better off than those left at home. So there are all these complexities, but there are lots of inequalities and inequities associated with migration. So it fits in beautifully within that broad remit of our research.
I think given the sort of project that you guys are both working on, I think it makes you very fit to answer this question. And my question is, how much of a role does academia have in contributing to the reduction of inequality? Because it seems as though academia, while it has all these very socialistic goals and you know, at the heart of it, it's a very altruistic kind of concept. It's still driven by money, and so how much can academia contribute?
Harry, you go first, and then I'll do the dark side or the truth. As I...
Well, you might as well go with the truth, Tim.
No, you start.
Well, I mean, I think Hussain, you're right. I mean, academic institutions are, we operate in a particular system where, COVID-19 has actually shown up the underbelly of all institutions, really. I mean, in a sense, so we are desperate in many ways for survival. So obviously, issues of inequality may not be at the forefront of many of the institutions at the moment, but yeah, I mean, even within academic institutions, the inequalities in terms of who gets promoted, who doesn't, gender dimension, there are significant concerns, and many institutions are addressing them really well. I know Royal Holloway is particularly keen on addressing some of those issues. Yeah, I mean, we are part of society, so we represent all of those inequalities that we see in society, like any institution. And it is a struggle, and it is, you have to revisit this constantly. I don't think it's a one-off. Mm-hmm. So academics have a role to play in terms of, it's not just researching and talking about these issues in particular contexts, for instance, in our case, the context of migration, but also, use our voice to present this, to the broader world. And for instance, MIDEC, one of the main goals of MIDEC is to ensure that what we do with partners on the ground who already have their networks within each of those local contexts. Therefore, we have some chance of influencing policy. I mean, there's no point, writing a paper. You started this conversation, before we actually started the interview. You talked about how you looked at academic papers, and most papers are only downloaded a few times. So research on its own, can't have the impact that it necessarily should. So we need to find ways of reaching the right audiences. And that's not always possible. It's a challenge. So in MIDEC, one of the ways we're doing that is by building coalitions up with international organizations like IOM, ILO, OECD, and so on, but also building coalitions down into the ground, in local context in all of the countries we operate in. Through that process, we have some chance of influencing policy. But I don't think we should pretend that research makes an impact per se, unless we really try to make that happen on the ground.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I've written quite a lot about this, and from a fairly critical perspective. And I come from, I don't know how much you know about sort of the Frankfurt School and critical theory, but my view is sort of that universities should be that they kind of like the psychoanalysts of society, helping society to be better. But as Harry was saying, and as you alluded to, universities are just businesses now in most of the world. So I'm incredibly loyal to Royal Holloway. I was appointed at Bedford College in 1980. And have been affiliated with it ever since. And I was head of geography there in the 90s, and have maintained very, very strong links. But in when was it, Harry? 2011. I decided that British universities were not the place to do the sort of research and teaching that I believed in. For the very reasons you're talking about. So I took the plunge and left, but was made an emeritus professor. So I still kept that affiliation. And that gave me the freedom to engage in much more of this practical research to cross boundaries. I've always crossed boundaries, both disciplinary boundaries between, I've been privileged enough to work for government in universities, the private sector, civil society, so crossing all different sectors. And I think, people see me therefore as a bit of a maverick and a bit disruptive, but I've found that is the only way that we can really do this. And I've had a pretty good publication record. I don't know, what is it, 13 or so books and several hundred papers. But academia, progression, as Harry was alluding, in academia for younger colleagues is and we never had the structures, but now, basically it depends on big research grants, bringing money into your institution and publishing in the top journals. And to be brutally honest, I don't think that's a particularly worthwhile or interesting exercise. To whom much has been given, and both Harry and I have been given huge amount. The freedom to be able to still think and do the sort of research we want to do. Mind you, that changed. That's one of the reasons I left, was because the sorts of research that were being funded were not the sorts of research that I believed were important. Things are now changing. So it's really nice to be something of an outsider, something of someone who transgresses boundaries, able to help younger colleagues like Harry and others in our research group to still have that freedom to do what we believe in as being really, really important. So I completely agree with you that British universities, in many areas, are self-serving, and academics, they have careers to follow. Fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're really going to use this privileged understanding that we're able to gain to help and work with and support and change the structures, that's the interesting thing, and the worthwhile thing for me anyway.
Absolutely. I think this is a very pertinent subject, and it's one that I try to sort of touch on in every podcast that I have and every episode that I have, not because there's an agenda behind it, but purely because of the fact that I think now, given the nature of social media and given the nature of communication in general, it's unfortunate that some of the most popular academic researchers on social media, especially in the US, have been the ones who have been perhaps borderline vulgar and problematic in terms of their views on migration, in terms of their view on race and that sort of stuff. And they've developed enormous followings. And in my mind, I think people like yourselves, Tim and Harry, given the work that you do and its importance, need to have or should have more of a direct presence with the wider audiences. And that sort of leads me to asking you, Tim, a little bit about your publications or your books that you've worked on. So what have you what have you published?
Quite a lot. But actually, one of the reasons, I think, the better answer to your question is, one of the reasons I left academia was that realizing that academic papers nobody read. Some of my books have been, and I've quite good citation index. So lots of my best stuff is actually published on my blogs. And through social media. I mean, I was one of the very early days. We used the ICT for the collective. We used Facebook, and that group now has like over 5,000 members who are all posting around the research. So we've been very active in social media, we've got to go because I'm conscious of the time. But there's a whole other discussion around the corruption of the peer review system, the ways in which academia prevents innovative writing taking place within academic journals. Not all of them. Some of them still encourage that, and good. But the whole system is very, very problematic.
Absolutely. I mean, and I'd love to sort of touch on that in a bit more detail at some point in the future. Harry, can you sort of give us whether it's a timeline or just an overall idea of where you hope to take this research over the next sort of year or so?
Well, I mean, this is a 5-year project, Hussain. So we've got about 3.5 years to go. And so, there's a lot to accomplish, really. So as we told you earlier, because our initial qualitative research was kind of interrupted by COVID, We've found alternative means of reaching out to the migrants and collecting some baseline data in the early stages, because we need that to be able to understand the kinds of interventions that might be possible that would facilitate, help address some of the problems that migrants might be facing in many countries, many of the countries that we're working in. But of course, the crucial stage next is to actually work with them. So we need to be able to engage with them, understand, what the difficulties and challenges they face in those particular contexts. So this really has to be qualitative work. So if we are unable to go because of COVID, then we will have to find, engage more directly with our local research assistants to be able to do that. Ideally, we want to be there with them. And of course, we will have them be working in partnership with them anyway. But this part of the project is really crucial, because that is when we get a real sense of what it is that they would like. What are the constraints that they face? Whether is it to do with intermediaries? Is what kind of exploitation from intermediaries? Or is it to do with addressing particular service-related issues? We need to understand what their problems are in specific contexts. And it may be very different in different contexts. So that's the key part. And then leading up to the development of the intervention, where we have to build coalitions with local developers. We have some separate flexible funding for that, so from the project. So we need to, again, bring together a coalition of migrant community groups, perhaps, some members from the migrant groups themselves, working with local partners and ourselves to come up with, designs that might actually help address the problem. So in the next, it's crunch time the next 2.5 years for this project, in particular the next year, really. So, one hopes that we will be able to overcome some of these challenges from COVID-19 sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think fingers crossed you're able to sort of get back onto the field and get this work done, because it's really important work. I'd like to just sort of close. Where can people find you online? Are you on Twitter, or are you on where can they sort of reach you?
I'm a bit of a dinosaur, I'm afraid. So
I'll send you some links afterwards, unless you want to get this on recording.
No. I mean, I can plug it onto the video anyway. So, well, if you send me the links, that's more than enough. Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Harry and Tim. And hopefully I can follow up with you guys on the project at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Hussain. Great to meet you. And thanks for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks so much. I mean, it's as Harry's saying, it's great that you are sort of at the cutting edge of using technology in new ways to share excellent research and change. In formats that people like. So that's really good.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.